You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lolana.
And I'm Matt Garasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 2, Chapter 15 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, talking about the opposite of the last chapter, in a manner of speaking, in a manner of looking at the world. Mostovskoy sits down to reread Ikonnikov's writings after he's returned to his cell after meeting with the Commandant Liss, and Ikonnikov outlines his theory of what is most important in humanity. And in his view, the most important view of humanity is the small kernel, which most of humanity's history is mostly been spent trying to crush. And that kernel is of what he calls senseless, pathetic kindness, which is a chapter which leaves Mostovskoy somewhat contemptuous and yet a little confused. Is there anywhere here that you'd like to begin?
Yeah, we had a good question in our Discord about the last chapter towards the end. It was Dominique, I believe, asking, was Mostovskoy was he coming around? Was there some seeds of doubt sown? And I think that this chapter kind of throws him off a little bit by reading this letter. And I think it shows that him and Liss are quite different, actually, because Liss's reaction is to give Mostovskoy this letter back and these notes back, saying basically I know that you didn't write this because this is pathetic, this is worthless, there is no point to have written this drivel, basically. Whereas it actually does kind of have a pretty profound impact on Mostovskoy as he's reading through this. And I think that is something that is good. I think it's something that is clearly different between the two of them. And I think that the seeds of doubt that are sort of being sown for him are not necessarily because he is aligning with the fascists. I think it's because he's being pushed towards some sort of anti-ideological framework, like what is being kind of outlined in this chapter. So that's where I wanted to start.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good place to talk about, because Ikonnikov, throughout this book, I think poses some of the most morally provocative questions. And that continues here. I mean, this idea, right? I mean, he puts forth this idea, in short, if you've read the chapter, it's pretty self-explanatory, which is, right, that kindness is not an inherent good. Kindness can very easily be weaponized. So the only form of what kindness that he thinks is the highest form of human purpose is the kindness which, again, calls senseless, the kindness which fairy tales warn you about. And I don't know about you, Matt. I when I read that line, I laughed, because that innumerable I remember stories as a child are basically like, don't be naive, don't be kind to the wrong people. I that
Right.
would like struck home for me.
Right.
Which, Grossman has the habit of doing that, but in that form, I mean, it's kind of shocking how consistent societies are across place and times. But and he says, and we're trying to crush that. The evilness in the world is trying to crush that little kernel that exists inside all of us, which cannot be philosophized. And even as he says, the teachings of Jesus lessens it, right? In his Ikonnikov's view, the entire history of Christianity is one of great and terrible evil done upon the world, or great and terrible harms, I guess I should say, done upon the world. And he gives this really provocative example of what does that look like? Well, it looks like this Russian woman taking care of a wounded German man and giving him water that he asked for, while his comrades are literally in the act of executing her husband and other men from the village. And instead of strangling him, she does give him that water. And that is held up as an example of this ultimate meaning of humanity. And I think that's a really provocative, for Grossman, that is the most provocative example you could give in the context of everything that has come now. Is that something to be aspired to? And it's easy to say yes to until you look at an example at the extremities such as that. And then it becomes a real good question of, can you carry that out to the fullest extent of what it naturally implies? And that's a great question.
Yeah, he has something sort of interesting in the way that he's framing it, in that it's not like the aspect of kindness that he's talking about, it's not something that can be taught. It's not something that can often be discussed. It's something that can only be experience, because in the example of this Russian woman giving the Nazi soldier water, she can't explain why she's done it. And I think that if you could explain why, I think that's part of how it can, in some ways start to get weaponized. And that's sort of his issue with the Christian teachings. And he sounds very much like, he's called the old Tolstoyan for a reason. And that is because this is a very similar point to what Tolstoy makes throughout a lot of his work. And it is, like you said, very provocative.
Yeah. So I feel like I don't have too much to add to it that it doesn't say for itself. It's a well argued piece, and and going back to Dominique's question, where does it leave Mostovskoy? Well, unclear for the moment in the narrative. It finds purchase, which it certainly I would say would not have if it were not directly did not directly follow Lys enthusiastically embracing Mostovskoy as a sort of a strange brother in their act of statehood and the ultimate rejection of the individual human and the ultimate elevation of the state as purpose.
Yeah, and there's this other line I just wanted to bring up before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, this is just this sort of second to last paragraph, and then leading into the last paragraph, where he says that I have seen that it is not man who is impotent in the struggle against evil, but the power of evil that is impotent in the struggle against man. And then he concludes by saying that human history is not the battle of good struggling to overcome evil. It is a battle fought by a great evil struggling to crush a small kernel of human kindness. And so I think that this is the only remaining bright spot from the book, if you can call it that. So if this doesn't cheer you up, I am very sorry. We might not have good news for you.
Especially not about this novel. Especially the lead into that line is, it's funny, I marked those two down as some of my favorites from the chapter. My faith has been tempered in hell. My faith has emerged from the flames of the crematoria, from the concrete of the gas chamber.
Yeah, if you can look at that situation and see any kernel of hope, then I don't know. That might be the only positive or the only optimistic reading that we're left with from this book.
Yeah. But if you have not already read this chapter, you should. Just sentence after sentence full of bangers. I know it's dangerous to equate Grossman's voice with Ikonnikov's voice, and there's a good reason not to do that. But I mean, just in terms of writing banger after banger.
Well, yeah, I think there are parts that are similar, but I do think there's a sort of, in a lot of ways, like a practicality to this, because there's other points in the book where Grossman is critiquing this nonviolent resistance. And so it's really not a one-to-one.
Yes. Yeah. Very well said.
So, but in terms of optimism, we'll see.
We'll see indeed. Well, in that case, I think we can wrap it up here for today, and you will hear from us again soon.